Today is going to cover Shuichi Maida or Maida Shuichi. I think most of you online are familiar with him. I did mention him in my talk on interfaith, and that you can find that video on the Shinshu Center of America. So that's kind of my theme in presenting Maida, is that I think he's appropriate for today when most of us, I think almost all of us, are dealing in the interfaith world, especially here in the States, where we encounter people from many different religions and also many different kinds of Buddhism as well. So I'm going to start my PowerPoint. Wait a minute. Okay, I gotta do share screen. Okay, let's see. Okay, share screen. Share. Oops. Okay, let's see. I can't get to the, oh, here we go, slideshow, okay. Okay, can everyone see the slideshow now? Gary? Okay, good, okay. So Shushi Maida, I put Nembutsu in the pluralistic world, meaning this interfaith world that we are in. And I think he's just the ideal teacher for those of us dealing with interfaith interactions. Brief bio, he was born in Kanazawa City, but it wasn't until he's like 18, 19 years old, he attended a lecture that Haya Akirasu gave on the Tambutsuge. And those of you who read Heard by Me, you know that encounter with Akirasu just really, literally, he felt like he got hit between the eyes, that it just grabbed him. And yet he hadn't met Akirasu in person. He just was so impressed by hearing him lecture that particular occasion. So he went on to the University of Kyoto and studied under Nishida Kitaro. And you should know that he is one of the top philosophers in Japan. In fact, he's credited with really putting Japan on the map for philosophers, that he was able to talk about Japanese philosophy, particularly Zen Buddhism, to the philosophers of the West. So Maida studied under this very exceptional teacher. So he went on to become a school teacher and then became a professor of education, teaching the teachers. And all the time he's studying Buddhism on his own, mostly Zen, but looking into a lot of the old sutras and just trying to learn all he can on his own about Buddhism. And then finally, 19 years after his first encounter with Akirasu, he is brought by one of Akirasu's students to meet Akirasu himself. And from that point on, Maida becomes the devoted student of Akirasu, attending all of his lectures and retreats, and doing what he can to support Akirasu and learn from him. And then 3 years later, after the war ends, he gets the idea to go to Nagano. So this is, it seems like when he was in the teachers college, a lot of his students became school teachers in Nagano, and you know where that is, in the middle of Japan, in the mountainous area. And he would go there often to talk to them about Akirasu's teachings, and he got them also to come to Akirasu's temple to attend the retreat. So he had built up this very loyal group of people who want to study Buddhism in Nagano, and he decided he was just going to quit his job and leave his family and just go to Nagano and become a pure Buddhist student. And even though he left his family came after him shortly after. But he did quit his rather prestigious job and to live in this, being supported by the group in Nagano. And so up until he died, that's what he did. He studied, he wrote a whole lot, he went around lecturing, and all the time just being supported by this group of students in Nagano. So he, well, I'll talk about, yeah, Dr. Nobuo Haneda is the prime translator of Maeda, but he himself had not met Maeda. He went to look him up after Maeda had passed. But Reverend Gyoko Saito, who served both in Chicago and Los Angeles, did know Maeda well. He was a fellow student of Akarasu with Maeda. So I'm glad that Reverend Saito was able to share with us about Maeda as a person, and knowing, being able to have met him in person. So a lot of you are familiar with the two published translations, The Evil Person and Heard by Me. The Evil Person, the first edition was published by Higashi Honganji, Los Angeles. It's kind of a follow-up to December Fan, Dr. Haneda's translation. And later in 2017, he went to a self-publishing company called CreateSpace and reissued the book. And then Heard by Me, he published himself. He called his publishing house Frog Press. Those of you who know Haneda Sensei, he talks a lot about frogs. So that's why he names his publishing arm Frog Press. But there's a lot yet to be published by Maeda. This first one I wanted to talk about is a man named Noble was his nickname, but it's Noboru Sanwo. His story is kind of like Tanlan in that he was diagnosed with cancer and told he only had 6 months to live. And he's a Nisei, second generation Japanese American. And he became very desperate. He thought, I really want to understand Shinran and the Nembutsu teachings while I'm still alive, while I still have these 6 months to live. So he went and tried to find a teacher that could really explain Shinran and the Nembutsu. And he came upon Maeda, and he just went really into Maeda. He would order all his books and start translating them with commentary. So I was very lucky that Reverend Saito gave me a copy of Mr. Sanwo's notebook with all the translations and his commentary. And he attracted a group in Kingsburg where he lived, which is near Fresno. One of the ladies just told me they were so attracted to Mr. Sanwo because he spoke to you on a really deep level. It sounded like he would recruit people at memorial services because that's a time when people are thinking about life and death. And he himself was dealing with that. And somehow he attracted a group of people who wanted to learn more about Maeda and the teachings and what Maeda had to say. And I was very lucky. He came down to Los Angeles, Betsuin one time to visit Reverend Saito, and I got to meet him. And then he invited me up to Kingsburg to give a talk on Kiyozawa to his group. So I'm very lucky in the couple of years I was before he died that I got to meet him. The thing is, he did outlive the 6 months prediction. He lived way past, I think it was almost like 10 years, the original cancer diagnosis, because he's just so excited about Maeda and talking about what he's learning from Maeda. And I think in a way he was maybe lonely about how come nobody else in America is talking about Maeda. And then he found out the Buddhist Temple of Chicago published a lot of articles in our monthly bulletin translated by Dr. Neda and Reverend Saito and Joanne Sweeney. And so Mr. Sanwo contacted Reverend Saito and they started this correspondence. And then when Reverend Saito came to LA, they kept up their conversation about Maida. So Mr. Sama was so lucky to make that connection with Reverend Saito, a person who actually knew Maida. And also in Chicago, while I was there, and Dr. Netta was teaching the weekly study group, he translated a whole pile of essays by Maida, and including many of his autobiographical materials, which I have in a pouch that Dr. Netta had made photocopies of. They're all, you know, typed up with photocopies. But those are very precious documents that I have. And the autobiography especially was very inspiring to me as I decided to go to Japan and study, reading about that, taking that step to become serious and devoting yourself to the Dharma. And then, as you know, in 1984, Dr. Netta went to Berkeley to be at the Institute of Buddhist Studies, and then later at the Numata Center. But in the meantime, he started the Maida Center. He had informal study groups at his apartment, but then a man in Nagano, one of Maida's students named Mr. Tada, he became quite wealthy with a chain of drugstores. And he said he always credited Maida Sensei with giving him good business advice. So he felt, I want to return my gratitude by supporting someone who is teaching about Maida. And the group in Nagano told him, well, Dr. Netta's in Berkeley, he could use, you know, the financial support. And so that support from Mr. Tada enabled Dr. Netta to get a house to use as the Maida Center. Some of you have been there on the retreats, so you know what it's like. And part of the Maida Center plan was to publish most of the major works and also a biography of Maida Shuichi. I saw the plan. It was really ambitious to really get out some of the many works that Maida wrote during that time he was in Nagano. And I'm hoping, I tell people, soon to be published. I've been saying that for the last, I don't know, 10, 20 years. But Dr. Netta has completed the translation of Face to Face with Shakyamuni. In Chicago, we were using it for a monthly study class. Some of you on the Zoom call who are in that group, you remember reading sections from that particular work. And what's amazing, you know, this is like where the interface stuff comes in. Sutani Pata is usually associated, is one of the earliest compilations of the Buddha's words. And it's usually associated with the Theravada tradition, with the Pali verses and everything. But Maida, in looking at these verses, finds the Nembutsu teaching in those verses. And one time, Galen Almstead, some of you know who he is out in the East Coast, visited our temple to be a guest speaker. And he sat in on our study class. We're reading Face to Face with Shakyamuni. And he says, he can't believe this Maida guy. He's really twisting this Theravada text to fit the Nembutsu teaching. You know, that's the way Almstead put it, that he's really bending and twisting this text to fit Jodo Shinshu. But in a way, that's kind of what Shinran does in Kyogo Shinsho. He's taking texts from all kinds of different traditions and finding support in those texts for Hongan, for the innermost aspiration and the Nembutsu teachings. So I think Maida is not doing anything different than like Shinran's doing, but to me, it's just amazing. He's taking these this very early compilation of the Buddha's words and finding, even in that very ancient text, how the Buddha is conveying the Nembutsu to us through those words. So I hope Dr. Netta says it's taking him a while because he wants to write a very nice introduction, which, if you know December Fan and the Evil Person, he writes really thorough introductions. So I understand there is somebody in Berkeley helping him get that manuscript ready for publication. But it's amazing when you think of a Theravada text being used to talk about Jodo Shinshu. But when I did look at that list at Maeda Center of the major works that Maeda that they want to translate, one of them caught my eye, and that's the text called The One Truth Ocean, Ishinkai. And I told Dr. Net I would like to take a stab at that. So he made me a copy of the Japanese text. And this was back when I was living in LA. So I know it was like the 1990s or even earlier. I started working on that text. And I remember I did translate bits of the first 3 chapters. Right now I can't find them. I think when I was in LA, I didn't have my own computer. So I got the stuff somewhere. But I did save the 4th chapter in digital form, and we used it in our study class at Chicago, Buddhist Temple of Chicago. So some of you probably remember that time that we were reading that particular chapter. Also, I presented that chapter at the International Association of Shin Buddhist Studies conference in 2009. And I thought one of the interesting comments was Mark Blum said, the way you present that Maeda says the Nembutsu teachings are in Christianity, then who would want to change from Christianity to Buddhism if that's the case? That's Mark Blum's comment to me after I gave that paper. But if anyone's interested in the paper, I can send you a copy. So today I'm concentrating on my translation and of this chapter 4, because I think it illustrates about how Maeda can help us understand other religions and hear the Nembutsu in those other religions. And so that last chapter, I should point out the other 3 chapters. So Maeda starts off the book talking about Shinran and the Nembutsu. And then he thought he'd take a step away from Shinran to Dogen, who actually lived around the same time as Shinran, and who's known as the great Soto Zen master. And so that section on Dogen is called Genjo Koan, which is the name of one of Dogen's texts. And I think most of you know what a koan is, but maybe some of you are familiar with the text. But for Maeda, who did study Zen on his own and also under Nishida, he sees where Dogen, and a lot of people agree with that there's a lot in Dogen that's very much in line with Jodo Shinshu. There's some, might be the times, or that Shinran and Dogen had similar backgrounds where they both had studied on Mount Hiei before leaving the mountain. Dogen himself wanted to spread this Zen Buddhism to the common people, but sadly he was so harassed by the Tendai sect that he didn't get a chance really to succeed. He did make an effort, but Genjo Koan does show that he did write in vernacular Japanese, so he wasn't writing in the fancy classical Chinese just for the monks, but he was writing so that the common people could understand the Zen philosophy. Then Maeda takes a step going to China and taking the works of Rinchi, known as Rinzai in Japanese, and his theme of Heijo Buji, this idea of flat ordinariness. And it's almost, even to hear that phrase, Heijo Buji, that Rinzai is talking about, kind of what Jodo Shinshu is saying, that to take ordinary life and really honor life as it is, this ordinariness of life. So that's a very good chapter. I both Dogen and Rinzai, when I was in Chicago studying under Dr. Neda, we did spend a lot of time talking about the Zen philosophy and how Maeda saw it. But it's this 4th chapter on Jesus Christ. So the book is called One Truth Ocean, but here for the 4th chapter, entering the One Truth Ocean. So Maeda by taking another step further from Shinran, a whole different culture and time, wants to show even in that different culture, different time, that there's a Nembutsu teachings. So I just doing one section today. There's so much to it that I could spend lots of time on. But in the very first section of this work, Maida quotes from several Bible verses. I'm just picking out this one, Matthew 7, 18 to 21. So this is Jesus speaking. Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile, since it enters not the heart, but the stomach, and goes out into the sewer? It is what comes out of a person that defiles, for it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come. And then in the next section, Maida comments on this. When some Pharisees and a number of scholars from Jerusalem went to see Jesus to check him out, they saw the dirty, unwashed disciples eating with their hands. The Pharisees and scholars asked Jesus, "Why are your students eating with their hands and not following the laws of ritual cleaning before eating of our forefathers?" In response to this, Jesus gives a rather sardonic answer. First, he speaks to the crowd of people who came to hear him. Then later, he speaks to the disciples who just returned home. To them, he makes clear the meaning of his metaphor. It does not matter how filthy the food may be or how dirty the hands that grasp the food, because these things outside the body cannot sully the heart, mind, kokoro, the inner self. The place from which evil and deception come out is the human heart, mind itself. Some of you might be familiar with the idea of the ritual cleaning, and if you have Jewish friends that keep kosher, you know that in that tradition there are some very strict rules of what you can and cannot eat and how to prepare and serve certain things. But Jesus just throws all that out the window and makes it into a metaphor, saying, you're so concerned about outside things, about the formalities, but the real thing to be concerned with is what's in your heart. That's really where we have to look if you want to talk about what is defiled. So Maida continues the next section. In this metaphoric comment on food, the evilness of humans never comes from outside, but only arises from within. Evil cannot be blamed on outside forces or the environment. For us humans, as Buddha says in the Dhammapada, by myself I am soiled. The self is the only source of evilness. It is that which comes out of a person which causes harm. From the inner self, the heart mind, comes wicked thoughts. All these evil from inside are from inside and cause harm to others. In the Bible verse, it even goes on to list all those different defilements. So the phrase used by Shinran, foolish ordinary person full of blind passion, bonno gusto bombu, is the only measure of our basic character. What comes out of us is only evil, deceptions and wicked thoughts. Can we not see that here is Christ's deep awareness of the self, ki no jinshin? Ki no jinshin, I always found it's hard to explain in English. In Japan, we studying at Otani, it was clear to everybody what ki no jinshin is. Ki refers to the side of the humans, knowing our humanness, and jinshin is the deep awareness, and it's a phrase coming from Shandao. He said there is two-sided deep awareness, awareness of the self and awareness of the Dharma, the Hono Jinshin. And what makes this phrase interesting is that it's very characteristic of Higashi Honganji to focus on Kino Jinshin. I've heard people say it's not just versus Nishi Honganji, but also other Buddhists. Somebody said they were at a Buddhist conference and they said everybody's talking about Hono Jinshin, how wonderful the Dharma is, what we can learn from the Dharma. And only the Higashi people, and they're painting this really bright, sunny picture of Buddhism. And then the Higashi people come in and talk about Kino Jinshin, looking at this darkness within our hearts, becoming aware of this defilement that just bubbles up from our deepest mumyo, the unseenness, the avidya, what Buddha referred to, this old darkness that comes from us. And so it's a very characteristic, I've heard from other people, that of Higashi Honganji to talk about this a lot more than Nishi Honganji. And it is a very key element of Higashi philosophy. And then if you go back to Kiyozawa, he even says what comes from the self is evil. So our problem is to see the self and to see that evil and not get attached to it, to realize its causes and conditions that get credit for what we do, and not our thoughts, words, and actions that come from this great dark evil that's in us. And so Maida Sensei, actually in that book, Evil Person, he spends a lot of time talking about that evilness that, so other religions might talk about the devil or outside forces, but here Maida hears Jesus Christ definitely saying it's within us. It's to be careful of that. And I think even throughout the Gospels, Jesus does warn people, it's not these outside formalities of cleanliness that's so important. It's being able to see what's in your heart, what's really in your mind, that all the grasping that we do and all the suffering we cause others comes from this this self-attachment, which I guess that's another word for the evil, the self-attachment that we have to push ourselves, our interests, and to the point where we harm others and not respecting life as it is. So this is just one of the very many sections from this One Truth Ocean, but throughout this chapter, Kino Jinshin, this deep awareness of the self, is a continuing theme that Maida sees in the words of Jesus in the Gospels. Gospel refers to the first 4 books of the New Testament. What's interesting is that in this chapter, Maida points out certain verses he feels are the true words of Jesus, especially the words that reflect this Kino Jinshin. But he also has the nerve to point out other words of Jesus in the gospel as being kind of suspect, as not sounding like really that's what Jesus said. And it seemed, for people who study the Bible, that's kind of a outrageous thing to say, but actually there is a project called the Jesus Project, and I got to know about it because I follow John Shelby Sprong, this Episcopalian bishop who takes a very progressive view of Christianity. And so at the library, I did find a volume of what the Jesus Project came up with, and they actually color-coded all of Jesus's sayings. I don't remember the exact color, but one color means definitely the scholars agree this is what Jesus says. It's very consistent with his teaching. There's another color meaning it's kind of, maybe he said it, maybe he didn't. And then there's another color that said, no, this doesn't sound like him at all. So it's amazing. Maida picked out those words that Jesus Project came out with, that there were certain words he felt definitely is consistent with Jesus's teachings, and he felt other words just didn't sound like him at all. So those, if you know people who are Bible scholars, they will probably tell you, just like any text, the Bible has been tampered, the original text hasn't been tampered through many hands, so it's really hard to tell what is authentic and what is not. But this Jesus Project is interesting that they got a group of scholars to look at consistency, and they found there were some sections that they agreed that did not sound that was out of step with what the rest of Jesus says. So it's a very interesting project. But the fact that Maida actually zeroed in on those same verses that they talked about, I think was interesting to me. So finally, I just want to bring out Kino Jinshin, the deep awareness of self. There are some concerns I have about using that phrase, because it's really about self-examination. It's about seeing yourself. And some people will use this teaching of self-examination to do what I call blame the victim. They say if you look within, you can overcome your anger and feelings of hurt. You'll see that they're all based on ego desire. And actually, there was a woman who's quite well known in the Buddhist world. She spoke in Chicago at this one big event, and it was in 2006. And Chicago was full of protests over the shooting of Laquan McDonald. Not so much the shooting, I mean, the shooting was terrible, but the cover up of the mayor and other people to cover up that awful incident. So there was a lot of protests in Chicago. And this woman came and said, I don't know why these people are so angry. Why are these protesters so full of anger? They just need to meditate more. If they would meditate more, then they would realize there's nothing to be angry about. And so she gave this whole talk about anger, and it's almost like anger was this thing far away from her that she had long left in the rear, long left behind her. And she thinks all these other people who get angry are showing that they're not meditating enough. They're not examining themselves as she already has succeeded in doing. So we have to be careful when we talk about this deep awareness of self. So what Maida himself, when you read his writings, he seems to be kind of unconcerned with the problems in the world. In fact, some of his, he's writing about Japan during the occupation, and some of the things he says about that, what's going on at that time, seem rather harsh. And I have to tell myself that's how the times were in Japan at that, so he's just kind of seeing what's going on in Japan during that occupation. And Japan is still reeling too at that time from having the atomic bomb, and also, the war that the destruction they caused throughout Asia. So Maida's writing all this stuff during this very tumultuous time in Japan, as self-examination is something that his group became very, found it was very essential to their understanding of Buddhism. So Maida, in his writing, he might seem unconcerned with what's going on, but really it's to remind us, like Shinran does, that self-examination is for me to do, not for me to tell other people to do it. I don't know what's going on in their lives. I really can't say, oh, that person's crying and they're protesting because they just haven't examined themselves enough. We don't know. So Shinran and Maida does echo this, that especially if you look at the book, The Evil Person, when we talk about Kino Jinshin and self-examination, it's really for you yourself to look within. And so here I just put a note, this is kind of where I'm coming from, that we do live in this society in the West and dealing with people from other faiths. And I pick out Malcolm X in particular. I really was moved by the movie that Spike Lee made, and I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. There's also another very good book on Malcolm X by, I think his name is Malberry. But he warns that we do have these ego desires. There are these people, especially someone in his case that became very deeply devoted to Islam. We do have to recognize we have these individual ego desires, but it's so easy for these other forces trying to tell us what to do, or trying to rule us or take advantage of us, to play on those ego desires. So we need that broader perspective, which in his case was Islam, but also in other world religions. I think definitely Christianity and Judaism and Buddhism, that has this aspiration that includes all people. If you see the movie on Malcolm X or read the book, there's this very moving section where he goes to Mecca and he sees concretely before his eye the idea of all people coming together. It doesn't matter their race, their gender, whatever. All people are coming together and are interconnected. So that's what world religions aim for, to give us this a broader perspective. We have to recognize we are all a bunch of selfish people as individuals, and those selfish desires can be played upon by many forces. But if we can look at our religious traditions and hear that aspiration, and that's what we in Jodo Shinshu call Hongan, the innermost aspiration, to include all people, then we can be angry, we can't get angry, we can't get sad about the suffering of other beings. It's not this victim mentality, oh, poor me, but maybe looking at people going through lots of struggles. And also the self-examination is to also realize how much we are a part of those causes and conditions of their suffering. So it really is a time for us to ask ourselves, how am I perpetuating these things that are causing harm to others? And so one thing Maida brings out in this chapter is Jesus Christ was very much like Honen and Shinran in showing solidarity with those who are considered outcasts. If you read the Gospels, it's always the Pharisees, those are the fancy scribes and scholars. They're always complaining about Jesus. They say he hangs out with those dirty people, those tax collectors and prostitutes. You can imagine at Jesus' time, being ruled by Rome, the tax collectors are just the most hated group of people because they're collecting money for Rome, and it's a job really nobody wants to get stuck doing, but so they're very much hated by everyone. And then of course other people who are criminals, Jesus just sat down and had hung out with them. And so this happens throughout the Gospels, and so Maida takes note of that Jesus was one that didn't stand on these formalities of looking righteous, but the true righteousness comes in seeing your interconnection to all beings, especially those beings that are being looked down upon in society. And as all of you know, Honen was such a pioneer in doing that and coming down from Mount Hiei and going into the streets of Kyoto and talking to those, like I know Mark Wong did a presentation on the grave diggers, the people dealing with the dead bodies. If anybody's a bunch of outcasts, they were, but Honen specifically went to talk to them and bring the Nembutsu teachings to them, as well as all kinds of different people in Kyoto who considered lower, doing evil work or doing work that's dirty or defiled. And so Shinran followed in his footsteps as he went out to the countryside and dealt with the people who were called lower beings because they were farmers and fishermen and hunters, and did the kind of work that the aristocrats considered defiled. So Maida sees that clearly, that for Hongan, for this innermost aspiration for all beings to be concretely manifested, it does ask us to find solidarity with the people that we've been taught to look down upon, to find empathy and find even get to know them, like Jesus, sitting down and eating and hanging out with them, to find that, to know that the manifestation of Hongan, the innermost aspiration, is just abstract unless it forces us to see our interconnection with all beings, even the beings that the society looks down upon. So that's the presentation for today. Let me, stop share.